the unknown landscape. Dark days were coming. The weather was clear. Wind scoured plains as mobility demanded shelter that moved, conserved heat, and endured assembly. Mobility defined survival before agriculture fixed populations to single places. Movement dictated access to resources, shelter designed labor allocation, and risk management across landscapes continually historically. Seasonal movement followed, grazing herds, water cycles, and ripening plants. Timing reduced scarcity, synchronized labor, and prevented overuse of fragile environments during annual subsistence cycles repeatedly. Shelter, therefore, had to move faster than weather or enemies. Structures functioned as mobile infrastructure, responding to threats, scarcity and opportunity simultaneously across open territories, constantly. Weight limited everything because human backs and animals provided transport. Every component faced scrutiny. Mass volume, durability, and necessity determined inclusion during seasonal migrations, repeatedly endured. Structures needed minimal parts, reusable materials, and simple assembly methods. Complexity increased failure risk under weather stress, fatigue, and limited repair capacity during constant movement cycles. Regions lacked timber-forcing alternatives using hides, grasses, or bark. Available materials shaped shelter form performance maintenance and lifespan directly within constrained ecological zones, encountered seasonally. Cold nights demanded insulation, despite frequent dismantling and exposure weather. Heat retention relied on geometry materials, layering and shared occupancy under unpredictable nocturnal temperature drops common. Heat management mattered equally, preventing overheating during summer migrations periods. Excess heat weakened occupants, increased dehydration, and reduced daily efficiency across arid plains valleys routes traveled. Wind pressure shaped profiles, determining angles, flexibility, and anchoring methods. Shelters behaved aerodynamically, shedding force, rather resisting rigidly during persistent gusts, storms, plains exposure, seasons annually. The conical form emerged repeatedly because physics favored it everywhere. This geometry minimized surface area, stabilized loads, and improved airflow control across cultures, environments, continents independently. Poles converted vertical loads into ground forces, resisting collapse naturally. Load paths distributed stress, evenly reducing material failure. Likelihood under snow wind. Weight accumulation conditions repeatedly. Flexible poles bent under gusts, dissipating energy instead of breaking. Elastic behavior extended lifespan, reduced repairs, and maintained structural integrity during recurring wind events, common regionally. Hide coverings provided waterproofing, wind blocking, and adjustable permeability levels. Material properties balanced protection, ventilation, weight, and repairability, using untreated biological materials available locally, seasonally renewed. Hair orientation and tanning affected how moisture shed or absorbed. Treatment decisions altered thermal performance, drying time, and odor retention. Influencing comfort, hygiene, longevity inside shelters. Overlap seams directed rain downward following gravity rather than pooling. This reduced leakage, weight accumulation, and material saturation during storms, common across migration routes, seasons annually. Central smoke holes balanced airflow, drawing fresh oxygen inward continuously. Pressure differentials maintained breathable interiors without mechanical intervention, using natural convection forces generated by fire heat. Fire placement used buoyancy principles to evacuate smoke efficiently upward. Rising hot air carried particulates away from occupants while sustaining warmth, illumination, cooking functions centrally located. Interior volume remained small, conserving heat from bodies and fires. Reduced air mass required less energy to warm, improving efficiency during cold nights. Migrations extended seasons. Ground. Insulation separated sleepers from conductive heat loss below soil. Barriers reduced thermal gradient, slowing energy transfer across frozen damp or compacted earth surfaces. Nightly exposure. Raised bedding reduced moisture contact and improved thermal efficiency overall. Elevation also improved airflow comfort and cleanliness within confined interiors, supporting extended rest periods during travel. Floor plans organized social space without wasting scarce, heated air. Activity zones aligned with heat gradients and access supporting cooperation, cooking rest, and tool storage efficiently. Door orientation minimized prevailing winds while admitting manageable light levels. Orientation reduced draft's glare and heat loss simultaneously based on seasonal wind patterns observed historically locally. Entry flaps sealed gaps using gravity weight and overlapping layers. This simple system adapted to movement and wear without hardware tools or rigid fasteners required ever. Anchoring systems used stones, pegs, or snow resisting uplift forces. Weight and friction countered aerodynamic lift effectively during high wind events, frequent on open terrain zones. In frozen ground, alternatives distributed load rather than penetrating soil. Surface anchoring prevented damage and improved stability across permafrost. Winter camps, tundra margins, or seasonal ice. Portability required standardized components, interchangeable across repeated assemblies and repairs. Predictability reduced cognitive load and construction errors during fatigue. Stress low visibility or adverse weather conditions. Repairability mattered because replacement materials were distant or seasonal sources. Ongoing use depended on continuous maintenance capability rather than periodic rebuilding cycles under migration pressures alone. Hides could be patched, sewn, and reoriented, extending lifespan significantly. Repairs conserved resources and preserved shelter performance, despite wear exposure, moisture, smoke, abrasion, transport stresses recurring. Transport bundles, balanced weight distribution for people, dogs, or horses. Balanced loads prevented injury and fatigue over distance across daily travel routes. Variable terrain gradients encountered. Before horses, human transport constrained size, demanding further efficiency measures. Shelters remained compact, optimized, and lightweight by necessity until animal power expanded, carrying capacity dramatically later. Setup times affected exposure during storms, arrivals, or departures. Delays increased risk of hypothermia and damage when weather shifted rapidly across open landscapes without cover. Quick assembly reduced heat loss and weather vulnerability during travel. Speed functioned as passive protection mechanism, minimizing exposure time during critical transitions between camp's route seasons. Disassembly reversed steps, preventing damage through controlled sequencing and storage. Order preserved material integrity across repeated use, ensuring readiness for immediate redeployment when movement resumed again. Children learned component roles, ensuring communal knowledge transmission across generations. Learning occurred through observation, participation, and repetition, embedding technical skills within daily routines, family groups continuously. Regional variation reflected climate, vegetation, and available animal species locally. Shelters adapted materials form and performance accordingly, demonstrating environmental responsiveness rather than uniformity across territories inhabited seasonally. Plains teepees favored buffalo hides, while forests used bark coverings. Material choice reflected ecology, influencing insulation. Weight repair cycles and seasonal availability across landscapes occupied generations. Arctic tents emphasized snow insulation and low profiles against winds. Designs minimized exposed surface, retained heat, and incorporated snow as structural thermal mass in extreme cold. Desert shelters maximized airflow shading and rapid deployment during heat. Open forms reduced solar gain, prioritized ventilation, and minimized labor under intense temperatures and scarce water. Every design balanced permanence against movement dictated by subsistence patterns. Shelters lasted long enough to justify effort, yet remained light, adaptable, and temporary, by necessity always. No structure aimed for longevity, only sufficient service under conditions. Lifespan matched seasonal use material limits and transport constraints rather than ideals of permanence and stability. Material decay was expected planned and incorporated into seasonal cycles. Replacement aligned with hunting, harvesting, and migration rhythms, ensuring uninterrupted shelter availability for mobile communities always. Weather forecasting relied on experience, requiring adaptable shelters, rather prediction. Designs assumed uncertainty, responding flexibly to storms, temperature swings, and shifting winds across varied environments, seasons. These homes functioned as tools, not monuments within mobile lifeways. Value derived from efficiency, reliability, and adaptability, rather than symbolic display or permanence for survival contexts. Efficiency accumulated through generations without centralized planning or written designs. Repetition, observation, and memory refined systems incrementally over long timescales, within diverse environmental pressures continually evolving. Failure modes informed improvements after each storm or winter season. Damage revealed weaknesses, guiding adjustments in materials, geometry, anchoring, and assembly methods across repeated use cycles. Shelter systems integrated with clothing, fire, and movement strategies holistically. Each compensated for others, forming interdependent survival systems under constraint during migration, seasonal environmental pressure periods. Nothing was decorative without serving thermal, structural, or logistical roles. Ornament increased weight, complexity, and risk without contributing to survival. Efficiency within highly constrained mobile systems. The result was resilience, derived from understanding constraints, rather abundance. Knowledge of limits enabled consistent survival without surplus materials, energy, or labor, across unpredictable environments, continually. Portable homes enabled societies to track resources sustainably across landscapes. Mobility prevented overexploitation, allowing ecosystems time to recover between occupations during seasonal cycles and repeated migrations. Mobility and shelter co-evolved, shaping lifeways across centuries under pressure. Each adaptation reinforced the other, responding to environment, subsistence, and social structure constraints continually over generations. Firewood scarcity required shelters, minimizing fuel consumption through efficient heat retention. Reduced volume insulation and shared warmth lowered dependence on limited wood during prolonged cold seasons. Balancing retained heat against smoke accumulation required precise airflow control. Vent design reconciled competing needs using buoyancy and pressure differences generated by interior fires continuously rising. Residual smoke reduced insects, providing secondary protection without additional materials. This byproduct improved comfort, health, and rest during warmer seasons, within enclosed shelters during migration periods. Human breath introduced moisture, demanding ventilation to prevent condensation buildup. Moisture control protected insulation effectiveness and prevented freezing damage during cold nights and prolonged occupancy periods. Sloped walls encouraged droplets to run downward away from occupants. Geometry directed moisture, safely reducing heat loss and material degradation during storms, and daily condensation cycles. Steep angles shed snow, preventing structural overload during winter storms. Snow load was redirected, maintaining stability with minimal intervention across repeated snowfall events and freezes cycles. Taut skins reduced flapping, limiting energy loss and sound exposure. Stability improved insulation and reduced disturbance in windy conditions common across open plains and elevated terrain. Quiet shelters preserved external sound cues critical for safety awareness. Hearing predators' weather or people remained essential for survival during night travel and camp occupation periods. Shared occupancy concentrated body heat, reducing nighttime fuel requirements. Collective sleeping increased thermal efficiency during cold periods when firewood's scarce and travel demands high seasons persist. Adjustable flaps modulated sunlight, preventing interior overheating midday. Simple controls allowed rapid response to changing solar exposure across daily cycles, without altering structure form permanently required. Breathable hides reduced condensation, but sacrificed some insulation efficiency. Material selection balanced dryness, comfort, and heat retention based on season, climate, and travel demands continually shifting. Repairs occurred during travel, requiring simple tools and techniques. Mobility demanded fixes be possible anywhere without specialized equipment, under time pressure, weather exposure, and fatigue conditions. Construction relied on knives, awls, and cordage, avoiding specialized tools. Tool simplicity ensured universality, ease of replacement, and portability across diverse groups, regions, and generations continually. Sinew, rawhide, and plant fibers balanced strength, flexibility, and availability. Cordage reflected local resources and specific load demands under tension, weathering and repeated assembly cycles frequently. Simple knots allowed rapid adjustment, maintaining structural tension stability. Knots enabled fine-tuning without cutting or replacing materials during setup breakdown and environmental shifts repeatedly encountered. Poles required specific diameter strength and flexibility characteristics. Selection determined weight durability and wind resistance based on species growth conditions and intended shelter size requirements considered. Selective cutting prevented depletion, ensuring future shelter materials. Sustainable harvesting preserved long-term access to suitable poles within commonly used territories, across generations, repeatedly occupied seasonally. Poles persisted across years while coverings wore faster. Structural longevity reduced harvesting effort compared to hide replacement, which demanded hunting, tanning, and sowing labor repeatedly required. Loads balanced across travois, or packs, preventing animal fatigue. Proper distribution improved endurance and reduced injury during long travel over uneven terrain and extended distances traveled. Horse transport increased shelter size without altering fundamental principles. Core design logic remained, while scale expanded through added carrying capacity, supporting larger households and longer stays. Design scaled linearly, maintaining proportions despite size changes, allowing predictable performance material, requirements, and assembly times, regardless of household expansion during seasonal migration cycles and relocation. Larger households increased volume, demanding more materials and fuel. Raising transport weight, setup time, and ongoing firewood consumption pressures across extended winter occupations and cold seasons. Shelter size reflected social organization and kinship structures, determining shared spaces, sleeping arrangements, labor coordination, and resource pooling norms within mobile groups over seasonal migration cycles. Compact interiors, limited privacy, accepted as trade-off for efficiency. Prioritizing heat retention, communication safety, and rapid collective response under constant environmental pressure during mobile subsistence lifeways. Construction tasks aligned with social roles, ensuring speed and consistency. Distributing labor efficiently, reducing errors, and accelerating setup during movement. Under weather constraints and seasonal urgency. Shelter efficiency freed time for food gathering and processing, allowing greater attention to hunting preparation, tool maintenance, and child care during migratory cycles and seasonal scarcity periods. Shelters were adequate, not invulnerable under extreme conditions. Design thresholds accepted occasional failure in exchange for mobility efficiency during rare catastrophic storms and climatic extremes events. Weather severity sometimes forced relocation, despite shelter limitations. Movement reduced cumulative risk when structures could no longer cope with sustained exposure to extreme conditions repeatedly encountered. Placement exploited terrain, windbreaks, drainage, and solar exposure, reducing energy costs, improving comfort, and limiting weather-related damage throughout seasonal camps and migration routes repeatedly used. Seasonal sun angles influence door placement and daily routines, controlling light heat gain and activity timing across the year for mobile households during migration cycles annually. Minimal ground alteration reduced setup time and environmental impact, enabling rapid departure and limiting long-term landscape disturbance across repeatedly used sites during seasonal occupation patterns. Sites left faint traces, emphasizing non-permanent occupation patterns. Material lightness and reuse prevented durable infrastructure formation over long temporal spans, despite repeated seasonal return cycles occurring. Light structures leave limited evidence, complicating modern reconstruction efforts. Absence of foundations, walls, or debris obscures spatial interpretation in archaeological records across mobile cultures historically studied. Disruption of lifeways led to loss of construction expertise. Breaking transmission chains maintained through practice observation and repetition across generations under imposed settlement pressures and restrictions. External forces restricted movement, undermining shelter systems' viability. Constraints removed context that made portability adaptive and efficient within traditional territories during colonial expansion periods repeatedly enforced. Permanent housing altered thermal efficiency and social organization. Fixed structures changed airflow labor patterns and daily energy use compared to mobile shelters across imposed settlements historically. Observers mistook simplicity for primitiveness, ignoring systemic optimization. Functional minimalism reflected deep environmental knowledge, not technological absence, within constrained contexts of mobility and scarcity historically prevailing. Designs embodied physics principles learned through experience. Behavior of heat, air, moisture, and force observed empirically over repeated generations without formal theory or written calculation methods. Extra hides poles ensured resilience against sudden failure. Redundancy allowed immediate repair without halting movement or shelter function during critical weather events and emergencies encountered seasonally. Each storm refined understanding through direct material feedback. Wind, rain, and snow revealed strengths, weaknesses, and limits of existing designs under real environmental stress repeatedly experienced. Constraints bounded possibilities, preventing unnecessary complexity. Limited materials, transport, and energy favored simple, robust solutions suited to mobility and environmental uncertainty always present historically across regions. Every decision reflected implicit energy budgeting calculations. Calories, labor, heat, fuel, and time were constantly balanced under survival pressures during seasonal movement cycles, repeatedly faced historically. Portable shelters reduced exposure to localized resource collapse. Movement allowed response to depletion disease, weather, and conflict across wide territories during long-term habitation patterns historically. Designs reinforced identity through shared methods, not ornamentation. Collective practice signaled belonging, competence, and continuity within groups, despite frequent movement, across generations and regions historically connected. Memory demonstration and repetition preserved technical accuracy. Skills survived without writing through embodied communal practice. Repeated daily tasks across childhood, adulthood, and elderhood stages continuously reinforced. Young learned spatial awareness and material handling early. Participation in setup, repair, and breakdown taught practical physics through lived experience within family units during migration cycles. Design accommodated elders by reducing construction strain. Lighter components, standardized steps, and shared labor supported aging members within mobile groups across seasonal movements without exclusion occurring. Shelters dismantled quickly following loss, enabling continued movement. Death did not immobilize groups, preserving survival mobility under grief during harsh conditions and urgent travel needs arising. Despite adaptations, core principles remained stable across generations. Physics material limits and mobility demands anchored design continuity amid surface variation across regions, climates, and eras studied. Portable homes existed as ongoing processes, not static objects. Continual assembly use, repair, and adaptation defined their existence within moving lifeways shaped by environment and necessity.